Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Roar. Thanks for coming back to the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. Today, we're talking about the importance for leaders to consider how they want to be remembered, what they'll leave behind that is intended to last well after they're long gone. But before we start today's Weekly Roar, I wanted to recognize the fact that today wraps up my Follow the Leader series, where for the past 5 months, you and I learned about some important concepts in the foundations of leadership. These concepts are all intended to help you become the best leader you can be. It was designed as a way to measure up where you stand today as a leader and help you to identify those areas where you might need to focus more to become more well-rounded in your leadership. If you weren't able to catch every weekly concept since last May, the good news is that you can go to my website at www.lion-enterprise.com and access all of the videos by going to the Lion's Pride Library. This series starts with video number 50. When I first started this series, I was actually calculating how long it would take, and I wanted to see when it would end up. And the end date, I was surprised to find out, was actually today, September 11th. Now, we all know what that date means. It impacted every one of us in both the same ways as well as different ways. Almost 3,000 lives were lost on that one day 18 years ago. So before I start today's concept, I think it would be appropriate if we just took a moment of silence in honor of those who lost their lives that day. Okay, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. So if you're joining us for the Weekly Roar for the first time, I'm Greg Storch, and I'm the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where my focus is helping organizations develop positive work cultures. I'm a certified professional leadership coach and a certified speaker and trainer. Now, last week's topic was about how to maximize our growth as leaders. We learned that when a leader focuses on developing other leaders and not just on attracting followers, they maximize their growth potential, and their growth occurs at an exponential rate. Why? Because the sphere of influence is compounded when we grow other leaders, because we influence their followers as well as our own. So remember, if you missed any of these sessions, you can access them in the Lion's Pride Library on my website. Last week's video will be number 70. The Lion's Pride Library makes it easy for you and your tribes to get more of the roar. I want to start today by asking you all a question for you to think about. Do you spend time thinking about how you'll be remembered? I think that may be something we might do as we get a little older, but it's never too late to ask yourself that question as a leader. How do I want to be remembered? I have to admit, I've honestly thought about it in the context of, what are people going to say about me at my funeral? And that's kind of a good way to think about it. I know that's a little morbid, but it's a helpful way to put things in context and to get a clear picture on how you want to be remembered. So why is it so important to ask that question? Well, as leaders, At the end of the day, you have to know ultimately what kind of lasting value you want to leave behind. As leaders, that's really how we're going to be measured. The sooner you start thinking about it, the better, because we only have one attempt to get it right. And by the way, it's probably going to change and mature over the years until you actually gain clarity on exactly how you want to be remembered. Ultimately, this is about your legacy. Having a good grasp around what you're trying to accomplish in life, your personal mission statement, is important because it sets the direction for you and your life, which determines the legacy you'll leave. You see, the fact is that a lot of people don't even think about it. They don't really lead their lives, they just accept their lives. But we're not most people, are we? Hardly. We're leaders who understand the value of growth and the importance of thinking about these kind of things. So, if you've been thinking about how you want to be remembered, how as a leader you want to continue to impact future generations, then it's important that you get intentional about it. John Maxwell, one of the world's leading authorities on leadership, said it best when he said, "I believe that every person leaves some kind of legacy. For some, it's positive, and for others, it's negative. But here's what I know. We have a choice about what legacy we will leave, and we must work and be intentional to leave the legacy we want." That's great advice. It's all about leading our lives and not just letting it happen to us. We can actually control the outcome if we just decide to get intentional about it. So, what can we do to focus more on it? Well, the first thing is that you really need to figure out how you want to be remembered. What legacy do you want to leave behind? When you understand that, you can be more proactive on how you should live and how you lead. What will your eulogy sound like? Well, we're never going to get to hear it, but the way we live our lives can help us write the words now while we're still here. How do you do that? You do it by living your life the way you want to be remembered, by the legacy you want to leave. As leaders, we all know how important it is for us to live up to what you say you believe. That's what gives us our credibility as leaders, right? So once you know how you want to be remembered, what it is you want to leave behind, then it'll be easier for you to live your life in a way that supports that desired end state. If you want to create that legacy you dreamed of, you have to start living it first. You have to become what you want to see in others. And by the way, when we talk about legacy, when we talk about what we'll leave behind, we're not talking about physical things here. The reason I'm telling you this is because it took me a while to realize that physical things aren't things that are going to last. That's not leaving a legacy. When we moved to Italy, we sold almost everything we owned. We kept very few things and stored them in a small storage space. Included in that space are my father's tools and his military uniforms. I kept those because I wanted to keep a piece of my father alive, and I wanted to keep his memory going. And I had memories associated, especially with those tools. I remember as a little boy growing up, using those tools out in the garage. And when my father passed away and I saw those tools out on the workbench, I just wanted to hold on to those and keep them. And you know what else is in that storage space? My tools and my military uniforms. I placed all of my military awards and decorations and uniforms into a container with the sole idea of passing it along to my children. As a matter of fact, they have this thing called a Shadowbox in the military. And when you retire, they build this wooden box where you place all your memorabilia, your medals and your ribbons and your duty stations and your rank insignias. I remember I used to think about, I built my shadow box myself, and it's a huge monstrosity. It's got lights in it. It's got 2 doors on it. I had an enlisted side and I had an officer side. And I remember thinking like, man, I really need to pare this thing down. This thing's a huge monstrosity. And I don't even think my kids will want this thing. And I always thought about building a smaller box and just putting a few mementos in it to leave behind. I remember calling my son and FaceTiming with him, and I'm showing him this, and I'm like, do you even want this thing when I'm gone? He's like, yes, I want that. So there is some attachment to it. But, you know, in my mind, I felt like holding on to those things and putting them in storage was a way for my kids to see who I was and what I did while I was here on earth. And in that way, I would continue on. That was my legacy. But it's really not. I mean, I don't even know if my kids will ever get that shadow box or those awards or, you know, all my other military items that I've left behind. But that's not really my legacy, is it? Things don't continue on. Our legacy doesn't reside in our things. It isn't in the personal monuments that are erected in our memory. You see these guys on top of horses in the parks. You know, half the time we're like, who's that? Or the works of art we leave behind, or buildings that were built in our name. The Greg Storch Memorial Library. All of those things are temporary. I mean, they may last centuries, millennials, but they're just temporary. What I've learned is that if we want something to live on forever, we have to do it through others. We have to do it through people, not things. People will live on even after we're gone. And so we need to figure out who will be the ones to carry on what we lived in our own lives. Now, the difference between living a life of significance and leaving a legacy as a leader is that significance is a result of developing others to do great things with us, while legacy is putting others in a position to do great things without us. So when you're selecting those who will carry on your legacy, be sure you choose wisely and begin to develop them to the point that once you're gone for good, they have the ability to carry on without you. The best leaders lead today with tomorrow in mind by making sure they invest in those who are going to carry their legacy forward. That's really how a leader's lasting value is measured. Life is short, and when it's all said and done, our ability as a leader isn't going to be judged on what we accomplished on our own. Here's an example. Think about some movies that you grew up with. Even some of the movies, not only that you grew up with as kids, but the ones that our parents grew up with as well. Many of them are unknown today. I talk about movies that I grew up with all the time, and I'm talking to people who are much younger than I am, and half of them, most of them, not even half, most of them have never even heard of these movies. but they were probably blockbusters back in the day. And now look, they're all but gone and forgotten. See, things just don't last. So we aren't going to be measured by things at all. We're going to be judged by how good of a job we did, by how well those who followed us carry on after we're gone. It's the people, not the things. Let me leave you with some things to think about and some actions you can take to start living a life of your legacy now. So the first thing is take some time to consider the big picture. What is your big purpose in life? Because your purpose in life is what is most closely related to your legacy. And once you determine who you can impact and what you might be able to accomplish during your lifetime, then ask yourself, what changes do I need to make to start living my legacy? Write those down. Maybe you need more education. Maybe you need to change some of your behaviors. Maybe you need to improve your relationship building. This is where you start to fabricate your legacy, right here when you start to live it and you identify those things that need to change and you start to make those changes. You have to live it and you have to make changes. Find out what they are and start making them. And then finally, ask yourself, who will you invest in to carry on your legacy? Find people who have greater potential than you ever did and start investing in them today. Okay, so that's it. There it is, the last concept in the foundations of leadership that I wanted to talk about in my Follow the Leader series. Man, this has been an awesome series over the past 5 months, and I really hope you got a lot from it. I'd love to hear what you think about today's concept. What is your legacy? And are you living the life now that you want to leave behind forever? Leave your comments below or on the side or wherever the comment section is. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in again this week for another weekly roar. I appreciate your support. And remember, if you like this content, share out the link to the weekly roar video that I'm going to post here after the watch party's finished. Don't share the actual watch party link because once it ends, I don't think you can share it. I don't think you can see it being viewed anymore. As always, I'm going to be back here again next week, same place, same time. So what's next for the weekly roar? Well, as you know, one of the most important things we can do as leaders is continue to grow. And we grow when we're able to accept change and learn from it. We have to remain flexible as leaders. We can't be rigid. And we have to pivot when change dictates it. So with that in mind, I want to begin speaking to you about some transitional changes, some of the pivot points we should consider in our own leadership as we change and grow. Next week, I'm going to start my new series called Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Leadership, by speaking about the importance for leaders to stay flexible and adapt to change if they want to continue moving forward faster. I hope you guys are going to join me again next week for my new series. All right, you guys, until we meet again, remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.